everyone, and I hope you guys are all having a great holiday season. Welcome to Lotus Rewind episode 4. I'm joined here today by the one and only Zimphonic. Unfortunately, Stubby isn't able to make it this week, but we do have a special guest with us, Trajèn. Welcome aboard the Lotus Rewind show. Glad to have you here with us today.
Thank you, thank you.
And let's just get right into some of these questions here. So, for for people in the audience who don't know who you are or maybe aren't as familiar with you, why don't you give us a little explanation of about yourself?
I started playing League around season 4, beginning of season 4, and just played it pretty casually. And then about 2 years ago, jumped into the competitive scene and jumped from one team to another and went to Imperial, played there under ZGG. This last split, came in and actually ran a team under Imperial, as well as playing on Oasis Nads and um have some pretty rough runs. Can't seem to lock down a good playoff run yet, but this has been my worst regular season, so I'm hoping that means a better playoff.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm glad to hear that you've been around the scene for a while and have some experience already in the amateur arena. How about you give us a little bit of an explanation about New Wave Paradox and how that kind of came to be?
Yeah, so while I was running a team under Imperial, I found Righteous, and he ended up being my jungler. He jumped ship to start New Wave as I was finishing out a split on Imperial, and then I jumped over to New Wave as well. We started forming a couple different rosters that we're going to be putting into some leagues in this upcoming split, as well as our own with New Wave and New Wave Paradox. This is the first event New Wave Paradox has been in, but I've taken players that I've found over the past 2 years, and they're all really, really good players, but we haven't quite found the click and how to transition from our early game leads into mid game. And hopefully, when we find that out, New Wave Paradox is going to come in and roll some playoff games.
Yeah, it definitely takes a while for most teams to build up that synergy. And I think one of the shining lights is, like you said, you guys kind of have an idea of what it is exactly you need to work on. And oftentimes that can be the hardest thing, is figuring out what is preventing you guys from doing better overall. So glad to see that you guys have like a clear goal that you're working towards. But you touched on it a little bit about having two teams in the LGL this split, New Wave Esports and New Wave Paradox. Have you noticed any big differences between Group A and Group B between those two teams?
Group A is the group that New Wave Paradox is in. It definitely seems like it's very top heavy. We came in thinking we were gonna be around the top with TA looking like the main contender there. Um, Whereas Group B looks like it's a lot of teams that are mid level, and that drives a more competitive environment across the whole Division B. As Group A, I think there's a clear divide between top and bottom, um, and I think that Group A is going to be coming out and rolling playoffs pretty hard, with the only contenders maybe being Clown Gaming if they're out as good as they look.
Yeah, Cloud Gaming has looked pretty good right now. I believe they're sitting at 9-0, so definitely a really strong contender coming out of Group B. One more question from me: Do you find it advantageous to have two amateur teams within similar skill level to scrim with each other or bounce ideas off of each other or anything of that nature?
Yeah, it's been super helpful. Actually, having Righteous on the same team as me was super rad because we were very much active players and actively scouting teams, bouncing ideas, draft ideas off of, and having him lead another team has only expanded that. Where we essentially get double the games in, double the meta to talk about. We get to have internal scrims where we leave picks open, or just try certain matchups to figure out which side is winning, and it's super helpful. It uh, provides an environment where people can grow a lot quicker than they would be otherwise.
Yeah, I didn't even think about having certain scrims where you're like, hey, just don't ban this bot lane duo, or hey, play this bot lane duo. We'll play this bot lane duo to practice matchups or see maybe some underrated picks in the meta. So I like that. I'm gonna pass over to Zymphonic now. Zymphonic, what do we got for Trajan?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you talked a little bit about, how this is maybe not the most ideal regular season for you and your team, this Lotus season. But how do you feel about your team as a whole, like in terms of improvement, or do you guys feel like you're on the right track of improvement, or just in general, aside from that, like what are your thoughts on how to improve in the amateur scene?
Finding personalities that click is something that I value a lot, and that allows us to be confrontational, but still be able to not take things overly personally. And it's our trajectory is only up. It's just a matter of finding consistency across each individual player. Um, we would always have a top half winning while our bot lane was falling apart, or our bot lane was winning and our top half would just be falling apart. And so we really couldn't find a way to transition our early game leads. We were consistently getting first two dragons, winning the early game with 2,000-3,000 gold leads, and then just really falling falling apart in team fights. So we actually have gotten the last 2 weeks off, or this is the second week we have off, to really take a step back and analyze our team fights, analyze what's going wrong, and hopefully we'll come back a bit stronger.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you touched on a really good point in terms of like taking that time. I mean, as every team here in both LPL and LGL, they got that week off. Yes, there's holidays, but there's also that time for improvement, that time to really look over everything, and especially as we get closer to playoffs, really kind of hone in on what's good, what's bad, and make sure you guys have a good chance at those playoff positions. So, in kind of switching gears away from playing the game, let's focus more on running an org. Do you think you get a better perspective on running an org being a player as opposed to a owner, or how do you balance that? How do you kind of bring perspectives from both roles into what you do with New Wave?
So I joined um, a organization called Tactical Gaming. Was my introduction into the esports side of League, and it didn't go well just because it was ran military style, which was pretty cringe, and you had to like check in, check out, and all of that was definitely super interesting. But jumping out of that, I tried out for many teams. Burger Flip Esports, who had a short stint in some leagues. Their upper management was very questionable, and so I went through quite a few organizations where the people in charge just didn't really know what was going on, or um, they were overly involved and overly controlling with everything. And so playing for organizations like that and then being able to implement into New Wave, what can we provide to players? We're all gold plat level players, or below when you're in IBS, and how to form a competitive environment where we all also understand that we're not getting paid. We're not doing this for anything more than fun and improvement. And I think finding some bad experiences helps in growing good experiences.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, and getting both perspectives, like you said, as a player, coming from, different orgs, being able to implement what you did like and what you didn't like into New Wave. I'm sure a lot of your players and both staff also appreciate that. So that's good to hear. So last question for us here, still sticking with the idea, of being an org owner, actually focusing on that now solely. What kind of advice, or what's one piece of advice you can give an amateur org owner right now to be successful? As there's an explosion of orgs everywhere, there's an explosion of leagues. Like, what is the one thing you want to share with someone to be like how to be successful?
Be willing to be wrong. A lot of people are floating around. They have a lot of experiences, um, and just be willing to learn when people are offering you information, and admit when you're in a situation in unexplored waters, basically. Um, and that will grow a lot of respect for you as a organization, as an owner, and people will be much more willing to be around that kind of environment.
Yeah, I mean that's incredibly important. I mean, we all live and learn, and I mean you gotta kind of everything starts from the top, and you kind of gotta be humble to really get everybody kind of going. So cool. I'll turn things over to JVL. Send us home.
Yeah, I really like that perspective from Trajan. Be willing to be wrong, be willing to be open minded. There's, like you said, there's so many new orgs and players out there, so many different experiences and perspectives to take in to really try to make it the best we can. So appreciate that from Trajan. Trajan, anything you'd like to say to anybody out there before we sign off with the interview?
I think I'm good. Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, thank you, Trajan. And we're going to go into a short segment now about drafting.
This league, where we're gonna go over some of the drafts that you guys have been putting in, week after week, and kind of breaking them down so we can kind of start seeing how this meta has been evolving here in the LPL and LGL. I think one of the first topics that we ended up talking about, in our first Lotus Rewind episode was to kind of start examining the meta that starts developing. Is we're one of the few leagues that are running here during the preseason, so it's super exciting to see kind of what you guys have been doing and seeing kind of how you guys have all been adapting. But the very first one we got going on here, we have it for the LPL. We have Absolute Esports on the blue side, Genesis on the red side here. And just taking a look, I kind of want to run through, bit by bit. We got some bans here, both teams getting their first 3 rotation bans, something we might not see in the second game we look over. But we start seeing a theme already. We start seeing some strong picks being banned out. Things like the Lee Sin, the Renekton, the Zed. Definitely things you don't necessarily see normally here banned out. They're not necessarily power picks. These are more given towards, respect picks, respect bans towards specific players. On the side of Genesis, you see things like the Fizz, the Lux, the Vi. Vi and Lux being really the only two that are, strong. They do fairly well in this meta. They do well to cover some bases. There's a flex pick there with the Lux, which is kind of going to be our theme here for this draft. But going with the flex pick, something that I always like to talk about, as a coach myself, is the value of flex picks. And that's kind of what I want to highlight, and we want to highlight here in this first draft with what Absolute Esports does with Genesis. Their first pick here, blue side B1, very powerful. You either use it to lock in something very strong. Things like the Jinx are still left open. Things like Vayne are left open. Things like Victor are left open. But Absolute Esports chooses to go a different route here. They choose to go here for the Sejuani. Sejuani being a very strong jungler in her own right now, taking advantage of a lot of these new item changes, things like the Fimble Winter, and just the upgrades or the buffs to some of the tank items, as well as clearing. She clears fairly well. She duels fairly well. But something that she suffers from is getting potentially soft countered by things like the Trundle, something that could take away her stats when she has that passive up and available. And that's something that we see here. We see Absolute Esports lock in the Sejuani. Without seeing the rest of the draft, you might think, hey, they're locking in a really strong, solid jungler here. And maybe they want to play around this early game. They want to draft some melee lanes to really take advantage of that Frost passive. And Genesis thinks they have a really good read here. They go with the Trundle. They cover their bases here. Trundle can take care of Sejuani, whether it's in the jungle, it can duel fairly well into her, or just overall later on. They also lock in the Viegos, so it makes me think, hey, Trundle might be going top. Maybe they're looking to maybe deal with something like the Sejuani top lane. The Viego could still technically go top, not as popular as it was once was, but it's still very strong here. And this is where the beauty of these flex picks come from, even from Genesis side. Trundle can go elsewhere as well. Trundle could technically go support. You don't see it as often, but you still can. But this is kind of where Absolute Esports kind of says, yes, you see the Sejuani, but we're going to for sure tell you that we're going to flex it here with the Lilia. Lilia can also technically go top. It can go jungle. I know a player who takes Lilia mid. And it just provides you, again, with that flexibility, and it lets you kind of move around and not commit to a comp theme right away. You're not committing to all in engage. You're not committing to pick. You're not committing to anything that things like, you know, a Hecarim, a Jarvan, a Malphite, things that just say, I want to go in. Or, you know, things like, you know, an Ash or things like that. They just kind of say, hey, I want to look for pick. You're kind of creating that ambiguity that you really want to see from some of these teams, and really gives you the ability to kind of flex around and kind of really determine or really establish the theme of your comp as you kind of draft along. Absolute Esports unlocks in the Caitlyn, very safe bot lane pick, very strong right now with the lethal tempo. Still not a Jinx, not a Vayne, but Jinx and Vayne kind of lock you into that hyper carry mentality or hyper carry playing, and it might make the enemy team kind of start focusing that bot lane to kind of shut down that hyper carry. But again, it leaves up that ambiguity. Genesis locks in that Jhin, a fairly strong pick into Caitlyn in its own right. Good range, deals well with what the Caitlyn does, has a way of locking her down with her low mobility, and can pair well with a lot of support. So even just taking a look at these 3 picks, both teams, or these first 3 picks on each side, both these teams really have a lot of stuff going for them. But again, it's the idea of flex. Absolute Esports can still kind of go any direction. They can move these champions around aside from the Caitlyn, where Genesis really just locks in this Trundle and Viego, and it's likely one of these is going to go jungle and the other one's going to go top. You really don't see them really going many other places. And as we take a look at some of these bans, you kind of start trying to see where these teams are looking. They're both looking to target down the support. Both teams haven't picked a support, so you start narrowing that pool down. Things like the Yuumi, the Bran, the Senna, the Morgana, things that can pair well with both AD carries here, and things that can provide a lot of damage or kind of just do a lot. And some of these may be more respect oriented. But as you start taking a look at, you know, what comes next, you know, Red 3 or Red 4, I'm sorry, you see the Vex. Vex is kind of where I start thinking this is very off theme for Genesis. You don't really have a lot of engage here. You don't really have a lot of dive potential either. You have something like the Vex here that's going to be looking to go into the enemy team. But what are you really going into? You're going into, right now, just a Caitlyn. And I mean, Vex in herself is in her own right is a very strong champion, but you're only going into Caitlyn, and now Absolute Esports has the opportunity to respond with really anything that they want here. You're not really bursting down a high priority target unless it's this Caitlyn, and you have no one to follow up with that Vex ultimate to kind of dive in. Should you get a longer reach one or a longer distance one? The only thing you really follow up is maybe a pillar or a Jhin Deadly Flourish. But it's definitely a little bit off theme, where Absolute Esports once again just kind of shows the flexibility of their picks, and they actually lock in Fiora, which some of me think, okay, so the Sejuani, you know, has to be going jungle, and maybe the Lilia goes mid, or Sejuani may be going support. No, they actually lock this in to secure the Sejuani going towards the mid lane. They, knowing that you're going to be seeing something like the Vex here, they move this, they opt to flex the Sejuani mid and just negate anything that Vex can do early. She can't really burst down a Sejuani early. She's innately very tanky, and the Sejuani is likely going to build fairly tanky, so Vex's ability to just kind of all-in combo or wait on those rotations, even as a manaless champion, she will not be able to burst down and win the 1v1 mid. She might still be able to harass and poke with the range that she does have, but it doesn't do well as it doesn't do as well as it does into other mage matchups or even into other melee assassin matchups. And this Fiora kind of secures, hey, I'm going to do well into Viego. I'm going to do well into Trundle. And realistically, now Absolute Esports has so many ways of sieging and disengaging with the Sejuani, the Lilia, and the siege with the Caitlyn, that this Fiora is going to be a menace in a 1-0-4 comp or even a 1-3-1. So again, it's this flexibility. The rest of the draft kind of gets rounded out. Swain, really good champion, really strong control in the bot lane. It's a mage control or mage champion. It does fairly well if should you decide to dive onto them. The Swain has that ultimate to really mitigate or do a lot of damage and soak up and heal and survive. And then Genesis locks in this Karma, giving them kind of a semblance of an engage here. Not necessarily the strongest engage, but at this point with the Swain locked in, you can't really lock in something that's short range or something that's melee. You kind of end up losing a bit of lane dominance should you lock that in, and you're just going to get poked down with the double range advantage. So what, again, to kind of wrap up a little bit of what I really like here, it's something that a lot of teams should learn, and I have been seeing a lot more, especially in LPL games, is the ability to use some of these flex picks. There's a lot of champions out there that are really strong. A lot of champions that play dual or even triple roles in different comps. And again, it allows you to kind of create that ambiguity, even in the first couple picks, and really force the enemy team to really think of what they want to commit to, and maybe try to. They'll have a harder time picking apart what you're trying to do, and it puts you already in an innate disadvantage. Because I mean, drafting, it's a mind game, really. It's like chess. You really kind of want to lead your opponent in with some of the picks that you're picking, and then really find the opportunity to kind of lock them down and put them at checkmate. But yeah, JVL, do you have any thoughts on this draft? I kind of took over and started kind of talking here.
No, yeah, you're good. You're good completely. This draft is a lot to take in, honestly, from Absolute Esports. I like to give them the benefit of the doubt and think, hey, you know what? They're 5 heading the draft. They're first picking the Sejuani, knowing that Genesis will answer with the Trundle because Trundle is like the classic Sejuani counter in the jungle, and I'm assuming some scouting was done beforehand to maybe bait Genesis into early picking the Trundle, and then hopefully, again, giving Absolute Esports a benefit of the doubt, they had the flex pick in mind the entire draft. So going straight into something like the Lilia already puts the draft on a complete spin. And Genesis really doesn't know where anyone's going. The first 3 picks in the draft, you know, Kate's going ADC, but the Sejuani and Lilia can kind of go so many different spots. And I definitely didn't expect the Sejuani to go mid lane either. So again, just wrenches thrown into the draft here against Genesis. And interesting picks here. Swain, I don't really see Swain that often anymore. I think Swain can be strong if paired with certain champions that really complement him or maybe can provide him some easy CC. I'm not in love with this draft for Absolute Esports. I do like the Fiora pick, however. Like you touched on earlier, you're kind of covering all your bases with the Fiora pick. You're saying, okay, I'm good into Trundle, I'm good into Viego, so no matter what, I should be fine on the Fiora split push, giving yourself another win con up in the top lane. And yeah, I feel like Genesis, after the first few picks from the draft, were just trying to catch on to what Absolute Esports were doing, but it was so like out of the box that I don't think they ever really got around to covering all of their bases. And something like the Vex, like you touched on earlier, doesn't really make sense this game for Genesis. So overall, I definitely give it to Absolute Esports this round. Interesting picks though. I like to see these wacky picks like Sejuani mid and Swain support, Fiora top, picks that we don't see as often maybe like last season or in previous amateur leagues. But with the preseason and all the new changes and item changes, there's just so many options. So excited to see what else we can pull from these drafts.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I think you touched on a really good point is like the idea of like it could easily be kind of moved around a little bit, and maybe too many flex picks could be a bad thing. You know, it's you start kind of trying to match flex for flex, and you end up with something that might not work. But I mean, Absolute Esports made it work. I mean, they did end up taking this game against Genesis, and they actually ended up taking the series 2-0 against Genesis. So I mean, hey, like you said, they make it work. A couple of different picks. It's really cool to see. But I think the next strat that we got going on here, coming from the LGL, will kind of show a little bit more straightforwardness and why sometimes having a comp that just kind of is straightforward might not necessarily be the best option.
Yeah, let's hop right over into that draft.
All right, so this second draft we have going on here, we have coming from the LGL, we have New Wave Esports on the blue side, and we have Goon Squad Gaming Chi on the red side. So right away, unfortunately, we do see that New Wave Esports did lose 2 bans here. But however, I mean, even taking a look, I kind of want to focus a little bit more, changing themes, less on flexibility, but more of committing to a comp or committing to a theme, and how, while good in theory, and majority of the time in gold, plat, elo, committing to a theme is good. Committing maybe a little too hard when things are left open, or maybe not banning necessarily the best things, or responding to themes and just kind of changing it up a little bit can be detrimental to a team. Right away, we do see the one ban that New Wave Esports was able to get out, I believe was the Trundle there. And GSG, however, was able to get rid of Urgot, Corki, Morgana. More respect bans, more, personal choice. Corki being probably the strongest out of all these bans taken out, just because it's a very strong champion, scales fairly well, and can be difficult to deal with if left unattended. But New Wave choose to lock into Hecarim. Hecarim, I think I touched a little bit on the last one, unless the last one that we just went over, is that he kind of commits to a theme majority of the time. I mean, Hecarim's kit is meant to go in, it's meant to dive, it's meant to lock down and create a disruption in the back line and allow your team to kind of deal with the front line and with the disruption that it does cause burn through the front line and kind of get back there, or even potentially even dive in with the Hecarim, which we'll see later on from New Wave's draft. But still, even with the Hecarim, his kit can be used a little bit differently sometimes. It doesn't necessarily have to mean all dive. It peels fairly well. It does provide a lot of early game engage, a lot of early game or high tempo early game ganks, and it can help create a lot of advantages with the team. However, as you start taking a look at the rest of the draft, we kind of start realizing that the Hecarim ends up being the secondary biggest damage source of the team, which means this Hecarim has to do well. He can't afford to give a lot of kills over to his solo laners, and he might not even be able to afford to give a lot of those early kills over to Kai'Sa, as he ends up losing a lot of his own power spike. He needs the power spike. He needs those 2 items. He needs to hit Mythic. He needs to hit a second item and really start outputting that damage. But should he end up giving those kills elsewhere, or should he not be able to secure those kills themselves or find a lot of kills early, he ends up just becoming a gank machine that eventually dives in, doesn't have the resources or the items to be able to survive, and ends up just wasting an engage, dying, and turning the fight into a 4v5. But GSG ends up responding quite interestingly. They end up locking in the Poppy. Once again, going back to the theme of flex picks, Poppy can jungle, Poppy can top, Poppy can support. But what it does here is it gives you the option to where if a New Wave decides to continue to commit to a all-in dive or team fight comp, you have the ability to use the Poppy to reset that engage, to either separate the enemy team after the initial engage for the Hecarim, knock back things like the Galio, the Ornn, the Nautilus, or any other champion, and maybe lock down this Hecarim once he dives in. It also has the ability to block a lot of engages as well. Later on, you'll see that it actually does really well to create space against the rest of New Wave Esports team. GSG also locks in the Ashe as well, a fairly safe champion. Things like the Jinx, the Caitlyn, the Vayne are still open, but Ashe does fairly well, could be comfort compared to the other champions, but it also creates a secondary form or even the primary form of engage for GSG. Should they opt to go into more of a pick-oriented comp, or do they maybe want to respond with playing from further away and not really giving the Hecarim the ability to dive in for free against a low-range carry, a lower-range carry like the Vayne? Then you lock in something like the Ashe, gives a lot of utility, especially with the hawk shots, keeps track of the Hecarim, and stops that snowball from happening. New Wave Esports decides to go in with the bot lane picks here. They are wanting to go all in. They are going to commit to the all-in comp and just go in here with the Nautilus and Kai'Sa. So at this point, you're locking in Hecarim, Nautilus, Kai'Sa. There is a theme, and that's kind of the thing that I want to talk about. You are committing to this all-in team fight comp theme. And a lot of the times when I talk to with gold teams, it's that's fine. You lock in a theme, something that you're comfortable, something that doesn't take a lot of, for lack of a better term, brain power to figure out how the comp plays. Your comp is very clear as day. You're going in, you're team fighting, you're diving with everything that you've got, and you're looking to snowball very hard, and you want this Kai'Sa to be able to get in and just burst down targets. Cool. GSG decides to respond with the Victor. Very strong mid lane pick, and surprising a very strong top lane pick, which we'll actually end up seeing later on with the draft. And instead of responding with their own support, they're like, our support champion pool quite large. Maybe there's not a lot of champions that were banned out. There's a lot of really strong picks into this. A lot of strong support picks that can be used to create space and or save the carries on the team. So New Wave ends up responding by banning out 2 supports. They ban the Braum and they ban the Tahm Kench. That can still be flex of support, but also could be a really strong top lane pick. GSG responds with mid lane picks. They respond with the Orianna, the Lissandra, things that can follow up very well with an engaged teamfight comp. The Orianna, Shockwave is a very strong tool that can be put both on the Nautilus, the Hecarim, and even the Kai'Sa in some cases. The Lissandra also can go in fairly well. It could go in with the Glacial Tomb, and it does fairly well to create space and to lock down targets. So GSG definitely thinking about that. They lock in the Thresh, very ambiguous. They save this Victor flex potential, and it makes New Wave Esports kind of have to start thinking, where's this Victor going? Is it going mid? Is it going top? And with this Thresh, it's just creating a safer bot lane, something that can disengage from this Nautilus early, really kind of put a halt on that snowballing that Kai'Sa and Nautilus want to do in the bot lane, because you have the range advantage against the Kai'Sa, which is something that I didn't bring up. But picking Kai'Sa and Ashe, definitely a little bit questionable. Ashe does really well of punishing the Kai'Sa just based on range alone. It lowers her movement speed. It doesn't necessarily let her catch up to the Nautilus as easily if she eats a volley, if she eats any autos. And unless she's willing to commit to using her ultimate to dodge something like the Enchanted Crystal Arrow, or to have the Nautilus eat that arrow, Ashe is going to have a lot of tools to really keep that Kai'Sa at bay. And with this Thresh lock in as well into this Nautilus Kai'Sa, you're really just putting yourself in a situation where anytime the Nautilus goes in for a hook, it's going to likely mean a Thresh Flay coming out as well. The box is a really big tool as well to create more space for the Ashe so that she can kite back and create the distance between the Kai'Sa and the Nautilus. And it also provides GSG the ability to actually play aggressive in this lane and really shut down any kind of power that the Kai'Sa looks to put into any shorter range carry or any other carry that doesn't necessarily AD carry that doesn't have a lot of utility in their kit. Things like, like a Jinx that you can go into that isn't going to be slowing you down unless you eat the chompers or you eat the zap, or even matching into a Vayne, which it's going to be short range versus short range. You're playing into something that's really going to keep you at bay. New Wave decides to kind of make that blue 4, blue 5 picks of really committing to that all in. They are feeling like the Hecarim Kai'Sa has enough damage for them, and they're going to lock in Galio Ornn, champions that do fairly well with this comp. Again, it fits the theme. It's you go in, you dive, you find multiple forms of engage, whether it's the Hecarim, the Nautilus, the Ornn, the Justice Punch, Flash Taunt on the Galio. They have multiple ways of getting in. And they're committing to this, knowing full well that that GSG has multiple ways of disengaging. Both the Poppy ultimate, the Steadfast Presence, the W, that shield that's gonna, or that ring that's gonna negate a lot of that stuff. It's gonna negate the Nautilus follow up on the Q should it land. It's gonna negate the Justice Punch. It even stops Ornn ulti second cast. So you're committing to this, knowing full well that this Poppy could potentially go into the top lane, or just match this Ornn and just get on top of the Ornn, stop the second cast of the ultimate, and not even allow you to throw the Call of the Forge God back into the enemy team. That's kind of where things for New Wave seem to fall apart. It's you're committing to a theme, but you're not respecting the fact that GSG is already drafting around stopping your engage. You still have the ability to flex things around to create more opportunities for yourself to have different ways of playing the game. Just committing with the engage you have alone, and maybe fighting a split push threat. Something like we saw in the last draft was the Fiora. Finding a different win con, because right now you're locking yourself into that win con of all-inning team fight, and it's not necessarily going to go well for you. GSG responds with the Veigar, which ends up being the key piece to this comp, actually leading to GSG's win. I believe it ends up being something along the lines of 16-5 and something, but that Veigar is huge. It ends up playing really well with the ranges that GSG's already created with the Victor, the Ashe, and the Veigar all have range advantage against all these other champions that New Wave Esports have drafted. And the Veigar cage itself is this immovable terrain that is going to stop anything that goes that way. It's not just one person. Anything that walks through that cage is going to be stopped. And it stops a lot of the follow-up as well. If Hecarim goes in and Veigar doesn't get hit, he drops the cage right in front of the rest of Hecarim's team. And the only way to follow up is with the Kai'Sa going in and the Galio going in, but it creates this zoning tool that allows the rest of GSU to respond to the initial engage. It also creates a lot of pick potential. It works well with working with the Thresh Hook, the Ashe Enchanted Crystal Arrow, the extended CC with the Victor Gravity Field. It just works really well to kind of just make it so that New Wave Esports has a very hard time pulling the trigger and finding the engage they need when GSG has so many tools already at their disposal to stop that engage, live the initial engage, and turn that fight around and counter engage in their own way. And also that Victor going in the top lane, I mean, it's going to harass the Ornn. It just gets a free scaling with First Strike and, Crown of the Shattered Queen. It's just it's the lack of flexibility in this case for New Wave Esports that actually ends up costing them the game, committing to the theme way too much when GSG's already responding in suit. So very interesting draft here. JVL, what do you think?
Yeah, I think you touched on everything pretty well here about the drafts here for New Wave and GSG. I think there are a few key things wrong with New Wave's draft that definitely did not help them out in the long run, like not pivoting after the first few picks of the draft and sticking with this kind of head down, running at you, full engage comp after you see GSG having really good responses with the Poppy, Ashe, and Victor immediately preparing to build like a disengaged zoning comp. So New Wave definitely fell into the trap of, oh, well, we're going engaged. That means every single person on the team has to be kind of going down this very specific route of win conditions. And another thing with New Wave's comp is that Kai'Sa is the only real DPS champion on New Wave. So if Kai'Sa doesn't somehow get ahead or excel somehow in the early game, especially when laning into an Ashe Thresh, which makes it already hard to get that done in the first place, you're going to have a really hard time actually putting out enough damage overall to just get through all the members of Goon Squad. So New Wave definitely put themselves in a really rough spot here. I really like the Veigar pick like you talked about. It just adds another layer of zone control on top of GSG's comp. I mean, with Poppy, Victor, Veigar, Thresh, it's just so much zone control. It's so hard for New Wave to ever pull off that dream miracle engage that they want with this team comp. And I think Goon Squad just showcased a perfect draft of how to draft when you're up against just a full engage comp.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I couldn't have said it better myself. And like I said, I mean, GSG did end up taking this game and ended up taking the series 2-0. Again, flexibility is important. And while some teams may be, something like finding a theme, finding a way of ease of execution kind of comp, teams, as we get closer to playoffs, you really got to start finding that groove, that ability to kind of, like you said, kind of deviate and not kind of like stagnate in a certain comp and really adapt to what the enemy team may be drafting. But with that being said, that's going to wrap up our first drafting corner here for Lotus Rewind. And I believe we're going to be going straight into the LPL power rankings and players of the week. We got CB Rush still in first place, even though they took a very unexpected loss against TA Super Cuties. Not because TA Super Cuties is a bad team, but I mean, they were doing good. I mean, every week you hear me rant and rave about how CB Rush is this unstoppable team, but I mean, TA Super Cuties kind of put them in the ground. They actually 2-0'd them. So it was a pretty convincing win against CB Rush. Granted, CB Rush, this is their first loss. They haven't lost to really any other team in their division aside from TA Super Cuties. And I mean, aside from that, game one was pretty dominant by TA Super Cuties. Game two was definitely a lot closer, but still, CB Rush does still maintain that number one spot, just because, they really haven't lost against any other tough matchups. So we're going to have to see how they recover this upcoming week. In the second place, we also have Cape Dogs Unchained, also taking a loss. It's a week of unexpected losses. They actually take a loss to Lotus White, who was coming off of a loss of their own in week 3. They end up taking the win 2-1 against Cape Dogs Unchained. Granted, again, they are still ranked 2. They end up having to play with a sub, Cape Dogs Unchained, a sub mid laner for games 2 and 3. Ended up having to move King Eatlove to the top lane because their top laner could no longer make it after game number 1. So that doesn't take anything away from Lotus White's win whatsoever. But Cape Dogs Unchained, again, have not really dropped any other game aside from this. And they're looking to recover again this next week. And we'll touch base as to why that's going to be such an interesting case as we move into later on to games to watch for the week. Absolute Esports ends up being the only remaining undefeated team here, retaining that number 3 spot, as they took a pretty solid win against Genesis. We just talked about their draft, so they definitely took a 2-0 win against Genesis. TA Super Cuties moves up as well, coming up, I believe, from the 7th place last week all the way up to the 4th place, taking that win against CB Rush. They are looking a lot stronger. They are looking like they figured out those kind of mishaps that they had in the first couple weeks and are really making that climb back into playoff contention. Coming in 5th, we have DZG Olympus taking a win over OK Infinite, our stream match of the week 2 weeks ago. They took it 2-1. Definitely looking real good here. They're, I believe, now locked in for 3rd place, or at least they're in 3rd place at the moment for playoffs, and they're looking to retain that here into this next upcoming week. The shifts coming in here, we have Lotus Black in 6th place and Lotus White in 7th place. Lotus White making their return to the power rankings this week after taking the win over Cape Dogs Unleashed. And Lotus Black taking also a win, again, unexpected win, not because they're bad, but because they're taking wins against undefeated teams over Catalyst Wraith. So they are looking very well. Both Lotus teams looking really good, making a comeback again from week 3 after taking a loss against both their opponents. Are definitely looking to keep that climb back up and get back into that playoff contention. Catalyst Wraith does end up rounding out our power rankings at 8th place, having a very big drop down from 4th to 8th. They did end up taking, I believe, their 2nd loss of the season now, and they are looking to have lost a bit of steam from the first 2 weeks. So we're looking to see what Catalyst Wraith can do, and will not be too easy this week recovering from that, as we'll also talk about that in games to watch moving on. So going into players of the week, we definitely have some good picks here, or good choices here. From Lotus Black in the top lane, we have Firefight. Firefight had some fantastic performances in their 2-0 win against Catalyst Wraith. Shen, he went 2-0-18. Nar, he went 4-2-10. I mean, Firefight is constantly putting in the work for Lotus Black. He has a very diverse champion that really allows him to play both weak and strong side for his team. With or without resources, I mean, Firefight is honestly constantly dominating his top lane opponent, and he finds a lot of ways to sway team fights into his favor, whether it's on things like the Shen, the Ornn, the Rumble, and other picks. He's constantly swaying it either from utility wise, or even just as a secondary form of damage and engage. So, I mean, Firefight, looking real good. Definitely a top laner to not be messed with. He's, in terms of notable LPL stats, he's in the top 10 for least deaths in the LPL. He has in the top 10 for most assists, and he is the number 2 top laner in the LPL right now. So, definitely not someone to sleep on as we kind of get closer to playoffs. In the jungle, from TA Super Cuties, we got Nubly. showing us that he is a very strong jungler. He actually ended up giving us back-to-back Vi performances, going 9-3-7 in the first game and 12-5-11 in game number 2 against CB Rush. He is the driving force for his team. I mean, he has strong objective control. He eats multiple bans per game, but he still finds strong picks that create high tempo early and really allow him to kind of flourish and help his team kind of lead the charge. He influences the game really early with strong jungle pressure champions. He sets his laners up for success, and honestly, when given a lead, he runs with it. He kind of puts the team on his back and just keeps going. And on this Vi, I mean, he got it both games, and both games he had some very impressive performances. Some notable stats. He is top 10 kills per game. He is the number 1 jungler in the LPL right now and the number 3 player in the entirety of the LPL. So he has made a comeback from those first couple weeks, and he is looking real strong. In the mid lane, one of our honorable mention players, I think from week 1, we got St. Alucard from Lotus White. He had a very great Anivia game, 11-2-13, and one of the losses he did have on Victor, I think he went 8-7-13. So very strong showing here from St. Alucard. He is a high damage output player who is constantly eating multiple bans again per game. So we kind of get a theme here of locking down these high resource champions or high resource players. In his win over Cape Dogs Unchained, and Alucard went blow with blow to Cape Dogs 2 mid laners, both King Eatloaf in the first game and the secondary sub mid laner for their second and third game. And honestly, he's a menace on scaling mages. Like, he eats Kassadin bans, Victor bans, Anivia bans, Corki bans. Like, it doesn't matter. He finds a new scaling mid lane champion to play, and honestly, he just gets this lead, spikes super early, and honestly, it feels like you're playing against a champion that spikes the 2 to 3 items even sooner, not just the scaling champion. Notable LPL stats: he's top 3 highest damage per minute, and he is in the top 5 mid laners for the LPL. So definitely well deserved after the week 1 honorable mention, and he is looking really good on Lotus White. In the ADC role, we have Daydream. She is the AD carry for TA Super Cuties. She had 2 fantastic games on Aphelios, 8-2-6, and Jinx 10-3-16. Don't let her stats fool you. You might hear otherwise from her, but she is a force to be reckoned with in the bot lane. She has really strong positioning in and out of lane, and plays really well when given resources and attention, and honestly ends up finding a lot of opportunities for herself, even when not being, the center of the team comp, or even given a lot of jungle pressure. She is frequently given a hyper carry. And honestly, she's a really big piece to TA's composition and success over these last couple weeks. So, notable LPL stats, she is top 10 CS per minute. So she is constantly finding those leads. Like I said, in the bot lane, with or without resources, she finds those leads. So definitely well-deserved as well. And last but certainly not least, in the support role, we have Ginshu from DCG Olympus. He is a Rakan aficionado. What can I say? He was given Rakan in game 2 and 3. He went 1-1-14, 0-1-16. And honestly, he embodies the champion's show-offy nature. When he finds those opportunities to engage, he leads DCG's map control really well with exemplary vision control, and he constantly leaves the team in the dark. I mean, this guy, when I take a look at the map, I mean, the enemy's map is dark, and he finds a lot of really strong picks, a lot of death bush opportunities as well with this Rakan, and I'm honestly surprised he gets it this often because he looks real good on it. Some notable LPL stats: he has top 10 assists per game, he has the second highest vision score per minute, and he is in the top 5 supports for the LPL. So again, definitely well deserved. Some honorable mentions. We have QDAF, the jungler for Lotus Black. She had a great series against Callus right this week. Her Sejuani, honestly, is a thing of nightmares for the enemy team. She was just constantly throwing those glacial prisons and just hitting them in the weirdest angles and just locking down left and right. She provides a lot of comms for the team as well, so it's really exciting to see Lotus Black come back from that week 3 loss, and she definitely provided a lot for their team. The other honorable mention, we have Neswick and Chill, the ADC for Dare Scarlet. His Jhin is disgusting. He got it both game 2 and 3, and honestly, he put the team on his back. He put in the work, took down Cape Dog's Valor, and helped lead the team in a 2-1 win. So Dare Scarlet climbing up there, trying to make it to playoffs, and they're doing it off of Neswick and Chill's back. So definitely some cool things to see. Last and certainly not least, we have our games to watch for week number 5. First and foremost, we have Cape Dogs Unchained versus CB Rush, our first and second place of the power rankings. Both teams coming from an unexpected loss for both of them in week number 4. So they're both looking to recover and really look to secure, one of those first 2 spots in the playoff positions. The last game to watch, we have Absolute Esports versus Callus Wraith. We talked a little bit about it. Absolute Esports comes in undefeated in the LPL, the only team that's left is undefeated, where Callus Wraith is looking to kind of change some things up. They are looking to take that win, or give Absolute Esports their first loss and they're looking to make that climb to try to secure at least the 4th place spot in Division B, or Division A, I'm sorry, so that they can put themselves in playoff contention. So definitely some exciting games to watch as we kind of get closer to the end of the regular season, and I'm sure we're going to be seeing a lot more upsets as we go along. But I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to JVL, man. We get to see you talk about the LGL this week.
Yeah, quickly before we go to the LGL, I want to piggyback on you praising St. Alucard. I've known St. Alucard for a while now, and he is so good at, like you said, scaling mages or scaling champions in general. He's kind of one-dimensional in his style of how he likes to play the game, but he's so good at his style that he can soak bans and still end up playing like the Anivias or the Corkis or Cassins and or Vladimir, and just, hit that one point in the game where he's just an absolute menace to deal with. But what a great week of games here for the LPL, and we're going to head over now to the LGL. Heading right into the LGL here for week 4, we have TA Spirit up on top, taking a 2-0 over Team Rattled. Next, we have Clown Gaming sitting second here. They also had a 2-0 this week. Clown Gaming looking like a top contender, along with TA Spirit so far in their respective divisions, putting on really great performances. Up next, we got Imperial Gaming. They took a 2-1 win over New Wave Paradox, going down in game 1, 0-1 in a 33-minute game where Corki did 46,000 damage with the new Corki build, with the Hydra, Mana Moon, Poke with Rockets nonsense, bumping out all the damage. But luckily for Imperial, they were able to keep it together and come back in games 2 and 3. Next up, we got New World Esports. They took a 2-0 win over Conduit Esports, and from the looks of it, these games were an absolute mid-jungle duo chasm here for New World. The mid-jungle duo just putting on an absolute show. Chesticles and Knives just ran rampant across the map and just outperformed their counterparts, putting them up here. Next, we got CB Dusk, and CB Dusk unfortunately took an 0-2 loss this week, which wasn't expected by some people, maybe getting a little bit overhyped for them, and it just seemed like they were just not on the same page this week. Sometimes, teams run into these bumps, but hopefully they can bring it together for the last few weeks here and end strong. Goon Squad Gaming coming in here at 6. They had a 2-0 win over New Wave Esports, and GSG really just took care of business this week. Pretty quick series, and show that they are here to be at one of those top contenders here in the LGL. In 7th place, we have Fiendish Codex. This was the stream game of the week, actually, Fiendish Codex versus Cape Dogs, and ended in a 2-0 fashion here for Fiendish Codex. Both games lasting around 40 minutes, and just team fighting back and forth until Fiendish Codex were able to pull it out in the end. Last but not least, we have CWRU Spartan Shields taking a 2-1 win over AGD. And it seems like overall CWU are starting to pick up some steam and playing really well together as a team and getting that synergy down as we head into the second half of the split here. As for the players of the week here in the LGL, we got Newbie Derp in the top lane, putting up some impressive score lines: 9-2-17 on Malphite, 9-3-15 on Ornn, and 14-1-3 on Gwen. So just absolutely dominating up there in the top lane. And Newbie was definitely the best performing player of his series, topping the damage charts across all the games, except the second when he was on Ornn. So, he had a huge lead in XP and gold against every game. So absolute dominant performance here by Newbie Derp in the top lane. In the jungle, we got Chesticles, 13-7-11 on Diana, 6-3-12 on Hecarim. Chesticles really just out-jungled his opponent this week, and his map presence was absolutely magnificent. Diana being a pick that we saw from him that kind of fell out of the meta recently, but putting on a great performance, respectively, there in the jungle. In the mid lane, we got Bad Vibes from GSG, playing Victor and Vigar, 8-1-10, 14-2, and 7, like you touched on earlier, Zim. Absolutely great Vigar game from him. And he just showed up on these scaling AP mid laners, providing that consistent DPS for his team and that good zone control. And yeah, props to Bad Vibes here taking on the scaling role. Next, we got Induced here from Clown Gaming in the AD carry role, playing Misfortune and Zaya, dropping over 10 kills a game, both games. And his performance this week was really his best yet, and it just had to be recognized here in Player of the Week. Game 1 was more of your standard ADC game, while Game 2, he was just an absolute menace on the Zaya and putting on a show for us here. Lastly, in the support role, we have FCG9 and from CWRU playing Lux Lulu and 4318, 0422, and 0317 on Alistar. So just standard support game, casually dealing more damage than the entire enemy team as Lux, because Lux is just a great champion right now. And also showing their prowess on Lulu, able to facilitate other carries like the Jinx that they had on the team. And that's going to wrap it up here for LGL for week 4. Now we are going to head into the highlights.
I've got that lightning inside me, son of a god. I'm like a titan that's rising, oh, just you watch. I'm stepping into fate, there is no time to waste. I've got that lightning inside me, this is how legends are made. This is how legends are made. This is how legends are made. I'm cranking up on the throttle, victory is mine. Show you the harder the battle, harder I fight. I've come too far to quit. Step back, I'm going in. I'm cranking up on the throttle. This is how legends are made. This is how legends are made. This is how legends are made. Like iron from the fire, getting stronger. This is how legends are made. Above it all, untouchable, a new animal. This is how legends are made. This is how legends are made. This is how legends are made.
Absolute madness in this week's clips. There were so many clips submitted. Thank you guys for those of you who submitted clips this week, but there were so many, it was so hard to pick the best out of them, but we had some banger clips this week. I have to say the Victor, I believe it was Mobster Penguin, insta flash the Rakan knockup, insta one-shot him into the Thresh Lantern, flash over the wall to get away from the set. I mean, it was picture perfect, honestly. I really liked that play.
Dude, honestly, so clean, dude. I really like that Diana pentakill. I gotta say, it's just the Rakan, just when everything comes together right when it should. The Rakan triple knockup, Diana's just like, this is my time. Just goes in, insta pops 3 of them, and then just picks up the penta afterwards. Like, man, it's the play of like dreams for a mid laner. You're just like, this is it right here. This is my highlight reel.
You know, too, as soon as Diana sees the Rakan with the 3-man charm, all they can think about is just like they just see the wombo in their head. They're envisioning it already in the future.
Honestly, looks so good.
Yeah. But thank you guys all for again for submitting highlights this week for Lotus Rewind. That is going to wrap it up for us today. I hope you guys all have a good rest of your holiday season, and we will see you guys next time.